Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on Bill C-364, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act introduced by the Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-364 seeks to do two things. First, it seeks to re-establish the per-voter subsidy, which provides that after a federal election, political parties receive taxpayer subsidies based upon the number of votes that they received during the previous election. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, it would reduce the maximum amount that an individual can contribute to a political party from $1,500 to $500. Mr. Speaker, I oppose Bill C-364 because I do not support the reestablishment of the per-voter subsidy, nor do I believe that it makes sense or see any compelling reason for why the maximum limit should be reduced from $1,500 to $500. Now, the core of this bill, the heart of this bill, relates to reestablishing the per-voter subsidy, and I want to take a little bit of time to talk about why it is that I oppose the reestablishment of the per-vote subsidy. And in that regard, I think it's helpful to provide some context in terms of how the per-vote subsidy came to be. And it came to be as part and parcel with political financing reforms that were introduced by the Chrétien government in 2003, whereby a $5,000 maximum cap was set in terms of contributions to political parties. And that change in political financing laws was a step in the right direction to the Chrétien government's credit. It is something that we continued in government when the previous Conservative government reduced the maximum contribution amount and banned union and corporate donations altogether. Now, when the $5,000 cap was introduced, it constituted a monumental change in terms of political financing laws in Canada. Indeed, prior to that, there were really no rules, no limits. Unions, corporations could donate large sums of money to political parties. And so in that fundraising environment, it is no surprise that political parties often relied upon a smaller pool of donors who contributed large sums of money, whether it be from corporations or unions or other wealthy individuals. And then the rules changed, and they changed very quickly, almost overnight. And so as a result, the per-vote subsidy was introduced to allow political parties to transition, to acclimatize to the new rules respecting fundraising activities. It was never intended that the per-vote subsidy would be permanent. Rather, it was intended to be an interim measure. And it is precisely for that reason that the previous Conservative government phased out the per-vote subsidy following the 2011 election. Now, there are proponents of reestablishing the per-vote subsidy, and they argue that it is a more fair and more equitable way in which to finance political parties. I would respectfully disagree with that assertion, Mr. Speaker. I say it is an unfair way to finance political parties, starting with asking taxpayers to pick up and subsidize out of sweat-soaked taxpayers' dollars political parties. The Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates that reestablishing the per-vote subsidy would cost taxpayers $45 million annually. And I can think of a whole lot of better ways that $45 million of taxpayers' dollars could be used than to subsidize political parties. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I would submit that the per-vote subsidy is unfair inasmuch as the party that receives the largest share of the votes receives the largest subsidy. Now, why might that be a problem? Well, I say, is it fair to ask taxpayers to continue to subsidize a political party that they may no longer support, that they may no longer agree with, having regard for the fact that there could be significant shifts in support between elections, Mr. Speaker? I would say that's not fair. And in that regard, Mr. Speaker, there is a built-in advantage for governing parties, almost always, as a result, over opposition parties. So again, I say that doesn't sound very fair. That doesn't sound very equitable. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, it provides a significant advantage to established political parties and a significant disadvantage to new parties, Mr. Speaker, because after all, a party that competed in a previous election would receive large amounts of taxpayer-subsidized funds, whereas a new party would receive nothing if it was a new party that didn't compete in the previous election. And there are many examples in Canadian history where we have political parties that have emerged, that have gone on to be very successful, whether it be the Reform Party or whether it in fact be the Bloc Québécois, of which the member for Terrebonne was a member at least up until yesterday. So, Mr. Speaker, for all of those reasons, I would submit that the per-vote subsidy isn't fair, isn't equitable. Proponents would go on to say, well, Mr. Speaker, this bill would help take money out of politics. Except, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't take money out of politics because it provides that individuals can continue to contribute to political parties as I believe they should. All it does is provide a whole new stream of revenue courtesy of the taxpayer to political parties. And then there are proponents who say, well, at least it would diminish the need for the Liberals to engage in their unethical, pay-to-play, cash-for-access $1,500 fundraisers. I say to that, Mr. Speaker, you don't need to pass Bill C-364 for the Liberals to end cash for access. All that needs to happen is for the Prime Minister to follow open and accountable government. Remember that document? The code of conduct that the Prime Minister said would bind himself, his cabinet ministers, and his parliamentary secretaries. Open and accountable government that provides that there should be no preferential access to government and no perception of preferential access to government. So imagine that, the Prime Minister actually doing what he said, keeping his word to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I know for this Prime Minister, it is a truly novel concept, Mr. Speaker. For all of these reasons, Mr. Speaker, while I believe this is a well-intentioned bill, I cannot support it. Thank you.